Cranberry Valentine by Wende and Harry Devlin. It was a gray February day in Cranberryport, and the warm fire was welcome in Grandmother's kitchen. Maggie, Grandmother, and Mr. Whiskers sat at the table amid ribbon, lace, and pink hearts. Maggie was making valentines for her friends. Valentine's Day was only a week away. Mr. Whiskers, Maggie's friend and neighbor, looked wistful. "When I was in school, no one ever sent me a valentine," he said. "Never." Later, after Mr. Whiskers had returned home to his little gray cottage over the dunes, Maggie spoke to Grandmother. "Poor Mr. Whiskers. I feel sorry for him. He's never gotten a valentine," she said. Grandmother was in a rush. "I'm off to my sewing circle, Maggie. Can we talk about it tonight?" 2 days later, Mr. Whiskers' fortune had changed, but he didn't think it was for the better. "It's terrible, Maggie! Look what somebody sent me!" He stood at Maggie's door in a fury and waved a frothy lace valentine in the air. "It's all about cupids and lovebirds, hearts and flowers, and it smells like rose perfume." He wrinkled his nose. "How sweet," said Maggie. "Revolting," said Mr. Whiskers. "Who did it?" "I wonder if it could have been that lady in a green coat. Yesterday she asked where you lived," said Maggie. Mr. Whiskers didn't worry too much until he received 3 more fragrant valentines at the Cranberryport post office the very next day. He quickly hid them under his coat. Now Mr. Whiskers was getting nervous. At Seth's general store, 2 more greeting cards for Mr. Whiskers appeared mysteriously. "Gosh, listen to this one, Mr. Whiskers," cried Seth. "Little Cupid shot his dart. Love for you has filled my heart. Be my Valentine." Mr. Whiskers turned red and hid his face behind the mops. "Say, all week some lady in a green coat has been in here asking questions about you," said Seth. "Suffering codfish, somebody's after me," groaned Mr. Whiskers. "Could be," said Seth. "Why me?" asked Mr. Whiskers. Then he reflected. "Why not? I'm the best clam digger in the bog country. I have wonderful whiskers. I sing like a blinking bird." Seth broke into Mr. Whiskers' shining thoughts. "Now, Mr. Whiskers, if some lady gives you a present on this Valentine's Day, you should have a box of chocolates to give in return. A gentleman would." Mr. Whiskers looked terrified at the idea. Seth chose a red satin heart-shaped box and handed it to his friends. At the sound of the door opening, the shopkeeper looked up. "Oh, here comes the lady who has been looking for you," said Seth. "Ma'am, I'd like to introduce you to Mr. Whiskers." "The lady in the green coat!" Mr. Whiskers froze. He was trapped like a fly in a honey pot. The lady in the green coat flew across the room to him. "Aha, Mr. Whiskers, at last! I've been looking for you everywhere. I hear you are the best man in town to fix an old chimney." "Fix a chimney? That's all? I mean, it would be a pleasure, ma'am." When the lady in green left, Mr. Whiskers did a little sailor's jig. "Saved!" he cried. "I'll give the candy to Maggie and Grandmother," he decided. He whistled all the way to their house on the edge of the bog. At the door, he bowed deeply to Maggie. "Candy for my best friends," he announced. "Come in," said Maggie. "Look, Grandmother, Mr. Whiskers has a present for the whole sewing circle." Mr. Whiskers heard a hum of voices in the parlor. "Well, I don't know." Mr. Whiskers hesitated. "Candy for all of us?" said Grandmother. The ladies in the circle stopped sewing and looked up. They began to smile. did you know it was the sewing circle who was sending all those valentines? We've been busy trying to keep you guessing, and all the time you knew it was us, declared Grandmother. Mr. Whiskers shuffled his feet. Suddenly, he put it all together. These were the secret admirers who had scared him with valentines. He drew a breath. Knew? Of course I knew, he sputtered. Suffering codfish, you can't fool an old seabird like me. Grandmother seated him near the fire with tea and cake. When the red satin box was passed, he poked 4 chocolates before he found one with caramel filling. Grandmother pretended not to see. Mr. Whiskers beamed. It wasn't so bad to be the Valentine of a whole sewing circle, he decided. Valentine's Day could be a wonderful day for people to think of one another. Now he could hardly wait until next year. The end.